Let's talk about the government rinsing you for your cash. Yes, we had the budget last week, of course, where, as you're well aware, the Chancellor decided to raise an extra £40 billion from taxation, particularly across things like capital gains tax, which went up about 80%. Also, of course, national insurance contributions from employers and so on and so on. A budget that she's tried to justify in quite a feeble way ever since. One of the things that she actually admitted on the Sunday shows yesterday was that she was wrong to pledge that taxes would not have to rise before the government was elected. And of course, many of you would have potentially elected the Labour government. You would have voted for your local Labour candidate on the basis of that and other pledges. And she now says that effectively, because she was wrong to say it, that it wasn't true. It was a fib. It was a lie. She was going to raise those taxes anyway. And as we'll now talk about with William Yarwood, who's the media campaign manager for Taxpayers Alliance. Welcome, William. Yes, it's making you somewhat poorer. But William, stay there for a second. We've had breaking news this afternoon that the government, and actually Bridget Phillipson MP, the Education Secretary, is on her feet in the House of Commons right now, setting out the fact that this government are going to increase tuition fees. Now, I don't remember that being in the Labour Party manifesto. Do you? If anyone can point me to that, any left-leaning Labour listeners that have a Labour Party manifesto to hand, if you could just thumb through it quickly and just tell me where it says that tuition fees were going to be increased. Bearing in mind it was the Labour government originally, a few years ago under Blair and Brown, that did indeed introduce tuition fees in the first place. But Keir Starmer in the past has had rather a lot to say about tuition fees.
Tuition fees is a huge debt for young people that they carry with them for a very long time. And that's why we rightly committed at last election to get rid of tuition fees.
What about university tuition fees then? Will you remain committed to scrapping them in your first term?
Pledges, Andrew. So the answer to these questions is yes.
So university tuition fees being scrapped will be in a Starmer manifesto?
Yes, that's why it's
the next election. Okay.
Me going to university as the first in my family was an incredible thing for my family because it was part of that ordinary hope of working class families.
On tuition fees, I felt very, very strongly that one thing that benefited me greatly was not having tuition fees.
William, I'm confused. That seems to be multiple clips of Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, in recent months and years, saying that he would not just not increase tuition fees, but he would abolish them. And yet we have his Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, on her feet right now in the House of Commons saying that they're not only not going to abolish them, they're going to put them up. What am I missing?
I don't think you're missing all that much, Russell. I think what you're missing is that Keir Starmer is, quite frankly, a barefaced liar. Starmer says one thing to win votes, particularly from younger people, as we know. Young people vote Labour en masse and did so at the last election. And then as soon as he gets into power, well, sorry, lads and ladies, I'm afraid your student leave fees are going to have to go up. So Starmer and this Labour government will say one thing and do another. But the interesting thing about the university tuition fees, if I may, Russell, is this is completely backwards. The Labour government came into power constantly promising reform of public services and reform of the public sector, and yet they seem more interested in shoving more money into it. And increasing tuition fees will just mean that more money is going into the pocket of university bureaucrats and bosses rather than actually provide any value for students or indeed reforming the system as a whole.
And this, of course, is designed to help universities, those universities that seem to spend most of their time, actually, William, deplatforming people and deciding that people with an alternative view to the establishment, making sure that they don't actually stand up in universities addressing students, and yet more money is going to be raised from those students and therefore those parents because of this government's penchant, I suppose, for, well, just fleecing the public, whether it be pensioners, now students, whether it be businesses, those that are entrepreneurial, those that have assets that they might sell either through shares or a business sale. But the government pledged not to raise taxes, didn't they, if I remember correctly?
Yes, indeed, and that's another pair of barefaced lie by this government currently. Reeves, during the election, and Starmer himself as well, constantly talked about not raising national insurance, not raising income tax, and not raising VAT. But there's a sort of nebulous wording here. They said national insurance, which most people thought meant employer and employee national insurance. And yet, as we saw at this last budget, Rachel Reeves has hiked employer national insurance. And another thing, Russell, actually, is the hypocrisy of what Reeves and Starmer constantly say. They constantly say they're in favour of growth, and they constantly say they're in favour of working people, and yet when it comes to what they actually do in government, they slam working people and slam growth by increasing taxes on small businesses and the workers in those small businesses. So those small businesses will likely have to find cuts in other areas, whether that's not hiring more staff, whether that's not investing in other products that they need, whether it's actually cutting salaries and laying off staff. So I don't understand how Reeves and Starmer can say they're in favour of growth and indeed business, and indeed, increasing Britain's economic, prosperity, when they're hammering the very people that actually do all those things.
Yeah, so let's just join the dots on that. So I've heard a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, the government have kept their promise. They haven't increased taxes on working people. But of course, people that run businesses of a small to medium amount of employees, they work. I would argue that people that run businesses often work a bit harder than the people that they employ. They certainly have more responsibility and take more risk, yet they now have to pay 1.2% more in national insurance contributions per employee as a consequence. So that would seem to be, again, yes, disingenuous at best. But just quickly, before we go to the news in a minute or so's time, let's just quickly talk about this black hole, because Rachel Reeves has said a lot about the black hole being 22 billion, even though £9 billion of that was, of course, public sector pay rises. Why she had to raise 40 billion when the black hole was, inverted commas, only 22 billion quid?
Yeah, quite. And actually, the Office for Budget Responsibility has failed to verify the existence of this £22 billion black hole.
Exactly.
And also, there's this issue with Reeves, like you said, increasing pay packets for public sector workers, expanding the quangocracy by shoveling money into GB Energy, the National Wealth Fund, Skills England, you name it.
It's all a big mess. Look, I'm going to have to go to the news. Sorry to cut you short, but look, thank you indeed for your contribution.